The whiskey-soaked gambler's hand reached for Delilah Carter's face in the dimly lit saloon, his breath reeking of cards and cheap liquor, when a wall of solid muscle stepped between them, and a deep voice rumbled, "That's not yours." Delilah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stumbled backward, her hand instinctively flying to her throat. The saloon had fallen silent around them, the tinny piano music dying mid-note. She hadn't even seen the mountain man enter, but now he filled her entire field of vision, broad shoulders stretching the worn fabric of his leather shirt, dark hair falling past his collar in waves that caught the lamplight. His back was to her, but she could see the tension rippling through every muscle as he faced down the gambler. "Now hold on there, friend," the gambler said, his words slurring together as he straightened his embroidered vest. His name was Victor Lang, and he'd been winning at cards all evening in Coolidge's Red Desert Saloon, growing bolder with each pot he claimed. "The lady and I were just having a friendly conversation." "Didn't look friendly to me." The mountain man's voice was low, controlled, but Delilah heard the warning in it clear as a church bell. "Looked like you were taking something that wasn't offered." It was October of 1883, and Delilah had been working at the Red Desert for 3 months, serving drinks and keeping the peace when she could. She wasn't a saloon girl in the way some were. She'd made that clear from the start. She poured whiskey, she smiled politely, and she went home alone each night to the small room she rented above the general store. But men like Victor Lang saw what they wanted to see, and tonight he'd decided her polite service meant something more. "I don't need defending," she said, though her voice shook slightly. She stepped around the mountain man's broad frame, trying to reclaim some dignity. "I can handle myself." The mountain man turned his head slightly, giving her a view of his profile. His jaw was strong, covered in dark stubble, and his eyes were the color of pine forests in shadow. Something flickered across his face, respect maybe, before he gave a small nod. "I'm sure you can, madam, but that doesn't mean you should have to." Victor laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the tension. "Well, well, looks like the lady has herself a protector. Tell me, mountain man, what's your interest here? You looking to claim what I was after?" The mountain man's hands curled into fists at his sides, and Delilah saw the way his knuckles whitened, but his voice remained steady. "I'm looking to make sure a lady is treated with respect, something you clearly know nothing about." "Xavier Yates, that's enough." The saloon owner, a portly man named Henderson, bustled forward, his face flushed. "And you, Lang, I think you've had enough to drink tonight. Time to settle your tab and head out." Victor's face darkened, his earlier charm evaporating. "I'll leave when I'm good and ready. I've got money to spend, and I intend to spend it." "Not here, you won't." Xavier Yates, the mountain man, took a step forward. He was easily 6 inches taller than Victor and twice as broad. Where the gambler was all polished edges and fancy clothes, Xavier looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. His presence filled the space, solid and unmovable. "The lady asked you to leave her alone. The owner's asking you to leave. I'm not asking." The threat hung in the air between them. Delilah held her breath, watching the calculation play across Victor's face. He was drunk, but not stupid. He looked at Xavier's broad chest, the muscled arms, the way the bigger man stood with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his life in places where strength mattered more than a quick tongue. "This isn't over," Victor finally said, jabbing a finger in Xavier's direction. But he was already backing toward the door, his boots scuffing against the wooden floor. "I don't forget a face, mountain man." "Good," Xavier replied. "Then you'll remember to be more respectful next time you see a lady." Victor spat on the floor and stalked out into the Arizona night, letting the saloon doors swing wildly behind him. The tension broke, and conversation slowly resumed around the room. The piano player struck up a cheerful tune, trying to recapture the evening's earlier mood. Delilah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, and she clasped them together to hide it. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking up at Xavier. "You didn't have to do that." Xavier turned to face her fully, and she felt her breath catch again. He was striking in a rugged, untamed way that was completely different from the polished men who usually frequented the saloon. His eyes met hers, and she saw something gentle there, despite his obvious strength. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "It was the right thing to do." "Can I buy you a drink?" she asked, gesturing toward the bar. "It's the least I can do." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'd like that, madam. But only if you'll have one with me and tell me your name." "Delilah Carter," she said, leading him toward the bar, "and I don't usually drink while I'm working, but I think Henderson will make an exception tonight." Henderson did more than that. He poured them both generous glasses of his better whiskey, the stuff he kept under the counter for special occasions. "On the house," he said, nodding at Xavier. "That's twice this month Langa has caused trouble. I appreciate you handling it without breaking my furniture." Xavier accepted the glass with a nod of thanks but didn't drink immediately. Instead, he watched as Delilah lifted her glass to her lips, waiting until she'd taken a sip before he did the same. The gesture struck her as oddly courteous, like he was making sure she felt comfortable before relaxing himself. "You're not from around here," she said, though it wasn't really a question. She'd never seen him in Coolidge before, and she would have remembered. A man like Xavier Yates wasn't easy to forget. "Just passing through," he said. "I've been up in the mountains, trapping and hunting. Came down to trade my furs and stock up on supplies before winter sets in proper." "The mountains," she repeated, looking at the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders, the calluses on his hands. Everything about him spoke of a life spent outdoors, working with his hands, surviving in places that would break lesser men. That must be lonely. Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone too quickly for her to read. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's peaceful, quiet. A man can think up there without all the noise and complications of town life. And yet here you are, getting involved in town complications?" She smiled as she said it, taking another sip of whiskey. The warmth spread through her chest, loosening the knot of fear that had formed when Victor reached for her. Xavier's expression grew serious. "Like I said, it was the right thing to do. I don't hold with men who can't respect a woman's boundaries. My mother raised me better than that." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Xavier said, and the past tense told its own story. "She passed 5 years back, winter fever. My father went the year before, thrown from a horse. After that, I sold the family ranch and took to the mountains. Seemed easier than trying to work the land alone." Delilah heard the loneliness beneath his words, the unspoken grief. She understood it in a way she suspected most people wouldn't. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. "I lost my parents too. Fire swept through our farm in Kansas when I was 19. By the time I got back from town, there was nothing left but ashes and memories." Xavier's hand moved across the bar, stopping just short of touching hers. "I'm sorry, Delilah. That's a hard thing to carry." "We all carry something, I suppose." She looked down at their hands, so close but not quite touching. She wondered what it would feel like if he did close that small distance. His hands were large, scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard and lived rough. But they'd been gentle when he'd stood between her and Victor, protective without being possessive. "How long have you been in Coolidge?" Xavier asked, and she appreciated that he'd steered the conversation away from grief, giving them both room to breathe. 3 months. I came out from Kansas with a wagon train, thinking I'd find work in the growing towns. Coolidge was the first place that felt like it might be home." She glanced around the saloon, at the familiar faces and the worn floorboards. "It's not much, but it's mine in a way. I'm saving money, planning to buy a little house eventually, something permanent." "That's a good dream," Xavier said, and she could tell he meant it. A woman should have her own place, somewhere she feels safe. They talked for another hour, long enough that Delilah's shift ended, and another girl took over serving drinks. Henderson didn't object when she stayed at the bar with Xavier, answering his questions about life in Coolidge, asking her own about life in the mountains. She learned that he could track a deer for miles by the smallest signs, that he knew which plants were medicine and which were poison, that he'd once fought off a mountain lion with nothing but a knife and his own stubborn will to survive. "You should see it up there when the aspens turn gold," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "Whole mountainsides look like they're on fire, all yellow and orange against the evergreens, and the silence, it's like nothing else. You can hear your own heartbeat, hear the wind moving through the trees like it's telling you secrets." "It sounds beautiful," Delilah said, and meant it. She tried to imagine Xavier in that setting, moving through the trees with quiet confidence, at home in a way he probably never was in town. "Don't you ever miss people, though? Miss having someone to talk to?" "Sometimes," he admitted again. "More often lately, if I'm being honest." His eyes met hers, and there was something vulnerable in them now. something that made her heart skip. It's part of why I came down early this year. Told myself it was to beat the snows, but maybe I was just tired of talking to myself. Before Delilah could respond, the saloon doors burst open and 3 men strode in, their faces flushed with drink and anger. She recognized them immediately as Victor Lang's associates, fellow gamblers who traveled the Arizona territory together, working the saloons and taking money from hopeful prospectors and cowboys. "There he is," one of them shouted, pointing at Xavier, "the mountain man who thinks he can lay hands on our friend." Xavier slowly set down his whiskey glass and stood, his expression calm but alert. Delilah's stomach dropped. This was her fault. She'd let Xavier get involved, and now he was going to pay for defending her. "I didn't lay hands on anyone," Xavier said evenly. "I just suggested your friend show some respect to a lady. Same suggestion applies to you 3. "Victor says you threatened him," another man growled, moving closer. He was tall and rangy with a mean look in his eyes. "Says you put hands on him." "Then Victor's a liar as well as a drunk," Xavier replied. "Now I don't want trouble. I just want to finish my drink in peace." "Too late for that." The third man, shorter but stocky, cracked his knuckles. "You embarrassed our friend, made him look weak in front of the whole saloon. We can't let that stand." Henderson was shouting something about taking it outside, that he wouldn't have fighting in his establishment. But Delilah barely heard him. She was watching Xavier, watching the way he positioned himself between her and the 3 men, how his body had shifted into a stance that spoke of readiness without aggression. "Please," she said, stepping forward. "This doesn't need to happen. I'll talk to Victor, explain that it was all a misunderstanding." "Stay back, Delilah," Xavier said quietly, not taking his eyes off the 3 men. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about them trying to save face." The tall one lunged first, and everything happened in a blur. Xavier caught the man's arm, used his own momentum to send him crashing into a table. The stocky one came from the side, but Xavier pivoted, bringing his elbow up into the man's chin with a crack that made Delilah wince. The third man hesitated, suddenly reconsidering the wisdom of this confrontation as his 2 friends struggled to get up. "I said I didn't want trouble," Xavier repeated, his breathing barely elevated despite the brief scuffle. "But I won't let anyone hurt Miss Carter, and I won't let you 3 bully me because your friend's pride is wounded. Now, you can walk out of here on your own feet, or Henderson can fetch the marshal. Your choice." The 3 men exchanged glances, pride warring with common sense. Finally, the tall one spat blood and pushed himself to his feet. "This ain't over, mountain man. Victor doesn't forget, and neither do we." "So I've heard," Xavier said, sounding tired. "Seems like a lot of effort to hold on to anger, but you do what you need to do." They left, supporting each other as they stumbled out into the night. The saloon erupted in excited chatter, everyone talking at once about the brief fight. Henderson hurried over, checking the broken table with a resigned expression. "I'll pay for the damage," Xavier said immediately, reaching for his coin purse. "You'll do no such thing," Henderson replied. "Those fools came in looking for a fight. You just defended yourself. And frankly, I'm grateful you didn't hurt them worse. Last thing I need is the marshal asking questions about bodies." Delilah's hands were shaking again, harder this time. The reality of what had almost happened was sinking in. Xavier could have been seriously hurt, all because he'd defended her honor. She pressed her palms flat against the bar, trying to steady herself. Xavier was beside her in an instant, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said automatically, then shook her head. "No, I'm not fine. You could have been hurt. They could have had knives or guns, and it would have been my fault. Delilah, look at me." His voice was soft but firm. She raised her eyes to his, seeing concern there, and kindness. "This wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Victor Lang chose to disrespect you, and his friends chose to start a fight. Those were their choices, not yours. But you wouldn't have been involved if not for me." "I chose to get involved," Xavier said, "and I'd make the same choice again without hesitation. A man stands up for what's right, or he's not much of a man at all." Henderson cleared his throat. "Delilah, why don't you call it a night? I think we've all had enough excitement. Xavier, you're welcome to walk her home if you've a mind to. These streets aren't always safe after dark, especially not tonight with Lang and his friends nursing their wounds." Xavier looked at her questioningly, not assuming, waiting for her permission. That small gesture of respect after everything that had happened made something warm unfurl in Delilah's chest. I'd appreciate the company, she said quietly. My room's just above the general store, not far. She retrieved her shawl from the back room and met Xavier at the door. The October night was cool, the desert air crisp and clean after the smoke and whiskey smell of the saloon. Above them, stars blazed across the sky in a display that still took her breath away after 3 months in Arizona. The buildings of Coolidge cast long shadows in the moonlight, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing. They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps echoing on the wooden boardwalk. Delilah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, more for comfort than warmth. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything tonight, for standing up for me, for not making assumptions about who I am or what I do." "You don't need to thank me for basic decency," Xavier replied, "but you're welcome all the same." They reached the general store, dark and closed for the night. A narrow staircase on the side led up to the rooms above. Delilah stopped at the bottom step, turning to face Xavier. In the moonlight, he looked almost otherworldly, all sharp planes and shadows, but his eyes were warm when they met hers. "Will you be in town long?" she asked, not quite ready for the evening to end despite everything that had happened. "A few days at least," he said. "I need to sell my furs, get supplies, maybe longer if there's reason to stay." The unspoken question hung between them. Delilah felt her heart beat faster. She barely knew this man, but something about him drew her in, made her want to know more. He was different from anyone she'd met in Coolidge, different from the farmers and prospectors and drifters who passed through. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with the muscles she could see straining against his shirt. "I'd like to see you again," she said, feeling brave. "If you'd like that too." Xavier's face softened into a smile, the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his whole face, made him look younger, less burdened. "I'd like that very much, Delilah. Maybe I could buy you dinner tomorrow, somewhere that's not the saloon? There's a little restaurant 2 streets over, run by a Mexican family. The food is wonderful, and it's quiet." She smiled back at him. "How about 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock, he agreed. "I'll meet you right here." She started up the stairs, then paused and looked back. Xavier was still standing there, watching to make sure she got safely inside. The protective gesture made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Good night, Xavier Yates," she called softly. "Good night, Delilah Carter," he replied. "Sweet dreams." She let herself into her small room and closed the door, leaning against it as she listened to his footsteps fade away down the street. Her room was sparse, but clean. Just a bed, a dresser, a small table with a wash basin. She'd hung curtains she'd sewn herself, and a colorful blanket her mother had made covered the bed. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Delilah moved to the window and looked out at the street below. She could just see Xavier's broad form disappearing around a corner, heading toward the boarding house where he must be staying. Her fingers touched her lips, thinking about how close Victor Lang had come to kissing her against her will, how Xavier had simply stepped between them without hesitation. "That's not yours." 3 simple words that had changed everything. She undressed and climbed into bed, but sleep was long in coming. Her mind kept replaying the evening, Xavier's voice, his eyes, the way he'd stood like a wall between her and danger. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. One evening of conversation didn't mean anything, not really. He'd be gone back to his mountains soon, and she'd still be here, pouring drinks and saving money for a house of her own. But when she finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of golden aspens and mountain silence, and strong hands holding hers as they walked through forests she'd never seen. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Delilah helped at the general store in the mornings, earning extra money by organizing inventory and serving customers. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman who'd taken Delilah under her wing when she first arrived in Coolidge. "You seem distracted today, dear," Mrs. Patterson observed as Delilah miscounted a stack of canned goods for the 3rd time. "Sorry," Delilah said, forcing herself to focus. "Just tired from last night." "I heard about the excitement at the Red Desert," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes knowing. "Heard some mountain man stood up for you against Victor Lang and his crew." News traveled fast in a small town. Delilah shouldn't have been surprised. He did. Xavier Yates. He was very kind. Mrs. Patterson said, a smile playing at her lips. Kind and handsome, from what I hear. Several of the ladies have noticed him around town today, selling his furs. Caused quite a stir. Delilah felt an unexpected twist of jealousy at the thought of other women noticing Xavier. She had no claim on him, no right to feel possessive, but the feeling persisted nonetheless. "I'm having dinner with him tonight," she found herself saying, "at the Martinez restaurant." Mrs. Patterson's smile widened. "Are you now? Well, that sounds lovely. You deserve a nice evening, Delilah. You work so hard, and you're always so careful to keep yourself proper. It's good to see you letting someone in." Was that what she was doing? Letting Xavier in? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. After her parents died, Delilah had focused solely on survival, on getting through each day and building a new life from the ashes of the old. She hadn't let herself think about romance, about the possibility of sharing her life with someone. It had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. But now, with Xavier's quiet strength and gentle eyes lingering in her memory, she wondered if maybe she'd been denying herself something important. Maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe she deserved to live too, to feel, to take chances on people who made her heart beat faster. The afternoon found her back at the Red Desert, helping Henderson prepare for the evening crowd. Victor Lang and his friends were nowhere to be seen, which was a relief. The other saloon girls teased her good-naturedly about her mountain man, wanting to know all the details. "Is he as strong as he looks?" asked Rose, a blonde woman who'd been working the saloon for years. "Stronger, probably," Delilah admitted. "You should have seen how easily he handled those 3 men last night." "And those shoulders," Rose sighed dramatically. "I'd let a man like that defend my honor any day." "Rose," Delilah laughed despite herself, "you're incorrigible." "I'm practical, dear. Good men are hard to find, especially out here. If you've caught the eye of one, you'd be smart to hold on to him." At 6 o'clock, Delilah left the saloon, having switched shifts with one of the other girls so she could have the evening free. She'd changed into her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She'd brushed her dark hair until it shone and pinned it up in a simple style that she hoped looked elegant rather than plain. Xavier was waiting at the bottom of her stairs, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at the ends where it brushed his collar. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her feel beautiful. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." She took his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. They walked to the Martinez restaurant together, making small talk about their days. Xavier had sold most of his furs for good prices and spent the afternoon stocking up on supplies. Delilah told him about Mrs. Patterson's teasing and Rose's comments and was rewarded with a deep laugh that rumbled through his chest. The restaurant was small but welcoming, with colorful woven blankets on the walls and the smell of spices and cooking meat filling the air. Mrs. Martinez herself greeted them, her round face beaming as she showed them to a quiet table in the corner. "I haven't been here yet," Xavier admitted as they settled into their seats. "Smells amazing, though." "Wait until you taste the food," Delilah promised. "Mrs. Martinez's tamales are the best I've ever had." They ordered, and while they waited for their food, they talked. Really talked, in a way Delilah hadn't talked to anyone in years. Xavier told her about growing up on a ranch, learning to work with horses and cattle from the time he could walk. He spoke of his parents with love and lingering grief, of how empty the ranch had felt after they were both gone. "I tried to keep it running," he said, staring at his hands. "But everywhere I looked, I saw them. My mother in the kitchen, my father in the barn. The ghosts were too loud, if that makes sense, so I sold it to a neighbor who'd always wanted to expand, took my money, and headed for the mountains." "And you've been there ever since?" Delilah asked softly. 5 years now. Built myself a cabin, learned to live off the land. It was supposed to be temporary just until I figured out what to do with myself. But temporary became permanent, and permanent became home. "Do you ever regret it?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," he finally said, "especially on long winter nights when the snow's so deep I can't leave the cabin for days. But mostly, no, I've made a good life up there. It's simple, but it's honest." Their food arrived, steaming plates of tamales, rice, and beans. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Delilah had to smile at Xavier's obvious enjoyment of the meal. "You were right," he said between bites. This is incredible. I'm glad you like it. She took a sip of her water, gathering courage for the question she'd been wanting to ask all day. Xavier, why did you help me last night? You didn't know me, didn't owe me anything. You could have just walked away. He set down his fork, his expression serious. I couldn't walk away, Delilah, not from that. I was raised to believe that a real man protects those who need protecting, stands up against bullies and cowards. Victor Lang was trying to take something you didn't offer, trying to violate your boundaries. How could I just stand there and let that happen? Most men would have, she said quietly. Most men do. Then most men are wrong. Xavier's hand moved across the table, palm up, an invitation. Delilah looked at it for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, gentle despite the calluses and scars. You deserved better than what he was trying to do. Every woman does. They stayed like that, hands clasped across the table, while the restaurant bustled around them. Delilah felt something shifting inside her, walls she'd built crumbling in the face of Xavier's simple decency. She'd been so focused on protecting herself, on staying independent, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone care. I haven't let anyone close since my parents died, she admitted. It seemed safer that way. If you don't let people in, they can't hurt you. That's true, Xavier agreed. But they also can't help you, can't make you laugh, can't share the good things along with the bad. Being alone is safe, but it's also lonely. Is that why you came down from the mountain early? Because you were lonely? Xavier smiled, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Maybe. Or maybe I was supposed to be here, right at this moment, to step between you and a drunk gambler. Maybe everything that's happened in the last 5 years led me to that saloon last night. You believe in fate? Delilah asked, intrigued. I believe that sometimes things happen for reasons we can't understand right away. I believe that every choice we make leads us somewhere, and sometimes we end up exactly where we're supposed to be. They finished their meal slowly, reluctant to let the evening end. Xavier insisted on paying despite Delilah's protests, and they stepped out into the cool October night. The streets of Coolidge were quieter now, most people having gone home or to the saloons. Walk with me? Xavier asked. Just for a bit? I'd like that. They wandered through the town, Xavier's hand finding hers naturally as they walked. He asked about her dreams, her plans for the future. She told him about the house she wanted to buy, something small but sturdy with a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers. I want something permanent, she explained. Something that's mine, that no one can take away. After losing everything in the fire, I need that sense of security. That makes sense, Xavier said. Everyone needs a place to call home. What about you? She asked. Is your cabin in the mountains home, or is it still just temporary? Xavier was quiet for a long moment. I thought it was home, he said slowly. But being here, talking to you, I'm not so sure anymore. Maybe I've been hiding up there, not healing like I told myself. Maybe I've been so afraid of being hurt again that I cut myself off from everything that makes life worth living. They had walked to the edge of town without realizing it, where the buildings gave way to open desert. The moon was bright overhead, casting silver light across the landscape. In the distance, dark mountains rose against the starlit sky. Those are your mountains, Delilah said, looking at the distant peaks. Part of the range, yes. My cabin's about 2 days' ride from here, up in a valley where there's good water and shelter from the wind. It sounds peaceful. It is, but it's also empty. Xavier turned to face her, both his hands finding hers. Delilah, I know we just met. I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I haven't felt this way in years, maybe ever. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm waking up from a long sleep. I'd like to keep seeing you if you're willing. I'd like to see where this goes. Delilah's heart was racing. Everything he was saying echoed her own feelings, the sense that something important was happening, something that could change everything if she was brave enough to let it. I'm willing, she said softly. I'm scared, but I'm willing. Xavier's face broke into a wide smile. He lifted one hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. Can I kiss you? He asked, and the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice Victor had tried to take, made her love him a little bit right then. Yes, she whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet. nothing like the aggressive advance Victor had attempted. Xavier kissed her like she was precious, like he had all the time in the world, like nothing mattered but this moment and her comfort. When they pulled apart, Delilah was breathless. Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face. "I should probably get you home," he said, though he didn't sound like he wanted to. "Probably," she agreed, but she didn't move away. They stood there for another moment, just breathing together under the stars. Then Xavier stepped back, offered his arm, and walked her home properly. At her stairs, he kissed her again, just as sweetly as before, then waited until she was safely inside before he left. Over the next week, Xavier found reasons to stay in Coolidge. He rented a room at the boarding house, took odd jobs around town, and spent every free moment with Delilah. They had breakfast together at the general store, lunch at the Martinez restaurant, and long walks in the evening after her shifts at the saloon. Delilah discovered that Xavier had a quiet sense of humor, that he could make her laugh with dry observations about the people they passed. She learned that he was patient, kind to animals and children, and that he could fix almost anything with his hands. She watched him help Mrs. Patterson repair a broken shelf in her store, his movements efficient and sure, and felt something warm settle in her chest. Xavier learned that Delilah was stronger than she looked, that she had opinions about everything from politics to philosophy and wasn't afraid to share them. He discovered that she sang while she worked, soft melodies that made him stop and listen. He saw how the other saloon girls looked up to her, how even Henderson valued her judgment on difficult customers. They grew closer with each passing day, the initial attraction deepening into something more substantial. Xavier found himself thinking about a future he'd stopped imagining years ago, one that included someone to share his life with. Delilah caught herself making plans that included him, wondering what it would be like to wake up next to him every morning. But the shadow of Victor Lang still loomed over them. The gambler hadn't left town, and neither had his friends. They were staying at a boarding house on the other side of Coolidge, licking their wounds and plotting. Delilah heard rumors from the other girls at the saloon, warnings that Victor was making threats about the mountain man who'd embarrassed him. "He's talking about getting revenge," Rose told her one afternoon, "says he's going to make Xavier regret interfering." "Should I warn him?" Delilah asked, worry knotting her stomach. "Honey, I think your man knows. He's no fool. I've seen the way he watches the street, always keeping an eye out. He's ready for trouble if it comes." Rose was right. Xavier had become more vigilant as the week wore on, always positioning himself so he could see the door when they were in public, walking on the outside when they strolled together so he was between Delilah and any potential threat. It should have made her feel like he thought she was weak, but instead, it just made her feel protected, cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. On their 8th evening together, Xavier showed up at her room with a serious expression. "We need to talk," he said, and Delilah's heart sank. Those words never preceded anything good. They walked to their usual spot at the edge of town, where they could see the mountains and the stars. Xavier was quiet, his jaw tight with tension. "I need to head back to the mountains soon," he finally said. "Winter's coming, and I need to get my cabin prepared. If I wait much longer, the snows will make it impossible to get through." Delilah had known this was coming, but it still hit her like a physical blow. "When?" she managed to ask. "End of the week at the latest." Xavier turned to face her, his hands finding hers. "But Delilah, I don't want to leave you. These past days with you have been the happiest I've been in years. I keep thinking about what it would be like to have you with me, to show you my world, to build a life together." "Are you asking me to come with you?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "I know it's too soon," Xavier said quickly. "I know you barely know me, and I'm asking you to give up everything you've built here, your job, your room, your plans for your own house. It's not fair to ask, but I can't seem to help myself. I'm falling in love with you, Delilah Carter, and the thought of leaving you behind feels like cutting off my own arm." Tears stung Delilah's eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "But Xavier, I've only known you for 8 days. 8 days isn't enough time to make a decision that would change my entire life." I know, and I'm sorry for putting this pressure on you." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "We'll figure something out. Maybe I could come back in the spring, and we could court properly, give you time to be sure." 6 months apart, Delilah said into his chest. That's a long time. It is, but if you're not ready, I'll wait. I'd wait years if that's what you needed. They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead, neither wanting to let go. Delilah's mind was racing. She'd come to Coolidge looking for stability, for a place to rebuild her life. She'd been so focused on her plan, on saving money for a house, on creating security for herself. But what good was security if she was alone? What good was a house if it was empty? Xavier had woken something in her, reminded her that life was more than just surviving. He made her laugh, made her feel safe, made her imagine a future filled with more than just solitary evenings in a room above a general store. But was what she felt real? Or was it just the excitement of new romance? How could she know after only 8 days? As if reading her mind, Xavier said quietly, I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Think about it. Take your time. Just know that whatever you decide, I'll respect it. If you need me to come back in the spring and court you properly, I will. If you decide you can't leave Coolidge, I'll figure out a way to come to you. I'm not giving up on this, on us, unless you tell me to. I won't tell you to, Delilah said firmly. Whatever else happens, I know I want you in my life, Xavier Yates. They walked back to her room slowly, savoring every moment together. At her stairs, Xavier kissed her goodnight, a lingering kiss that tasted of promises and hope and a little bit of desperation. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. Sweet dreams, Delilah. Good night, Xavier. She watched him walk away, her heart torn in 2 directions. Inside her room, she sat on the bed and tried to think clearly. Her practical side said to wait, to let him go back to the mountains and see how she felt after some time apart. If what they had was real, it would survive 6 months of separation. But another part of her, the part that had been silent since her parents died, whispered that life was short and uncertain. Fire had taken her family in a single night. Tomorrow was never guaranteed. If she'd learned anything from loss, it should be to hold tight to the good things when they appeared, because they might not last. She thought about Xavier's cabin in the mountains, about golden aspens and peaceful silence. She thought about waking up next to him every morning, learning to live in the wilderness, building a life that was completely different from anything she'd planned. It was terrifying. It was thrilling. Could she do it? Could she give up the security she'd worked so hard to build for the uncertainty of life with a mountain man? Could she trust her heart after knowing him for only 8 days? The questions chased themselves in circles until she finally fell into an uneasy sleep. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Henderson found Delilah at the general store, his face grave. Victor Lang was in the saloon last night after you left, he said. He was drunk and talking loud about how he's going to make Xavier pay before he leaves town. He's been gambling heavy, losing money, and he's blaming Xavier for his bad luck. That doesn't make any sense, Delilah protested. Drunk men don't make sense, Henderson replied. But I thought you should know. I tried to get the marshal involved, but Lang hasn't actually done anything illegal yet. The marshal can't arrest a man for talking. Delilah thanked him and immediately went to find Xavier. He was at the boarding house, packing his few belongings. When he saw her face, he set down what he was doing and pulled her inside. What's wrong? She told him what Henderson had said, watched his expression grow grim. I figured something like this might happen, Xavier said. Men like Lang don't let things go. I was planning to leave tomorrow morning before dawn. That should avoid any confrontation. Or you could stay another day or two, wait until he leaves town first, Delilah suggested. I can't. The weather's already turning up in the mountains. I saw clouds gathering yesterday, and that means snow's coming. If I don't leave soon, I might not make it through. Then I'm coming with you. The words were out before Delilah fully realized she'd made the decision. But once she said them, she knew they were right. She wasn't going to let Xavier face danger alone. She wasn't going to let fear keep her from taking a chance on love. Xavier stared at her. Delilah, you don't have to do that. I can handle Lang and his friends if it comes to it. I know you can, but I don't want you to have to. And more than that, I don't want you to leave without me. She took his hands, feeling the rightness of her decision settle into her bones. You were right when you said life is short. I lost my parents in one night, Xavier. They were there, and then they weren't, and I never got to say goodbye. I've spent 3 years being careful, being practical, planning for a future that's never guaranteed. But you make me want to live. not just survive. So yes, I'm coming with you, if you'll have me. Xavier's eyes were bright with emotion. If I'll have you? Delilah, there's nothing I want more. But your job, your room, your savings for a house. I can give Henderson notice today and leave tomorrow. Mrs. Patterson will understand. As for my savings, I'll bring them with me. Maybe we can use them to improve your cabin. Add a room or make it more comfortable for 2 people instead of 1. Are you sure? This is a huge decision. I've never been more sure of anything. And it was true. Despite the quickness of it, despite all logic saying she should wait and be cautious, Delilah felt calm certainty in her chest. This was right. Xavier was right. Their future together was right. Xavier swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her. This kiss was different from the others, deeper, more passionate, full of promise and relief and joy. When he set her down, they were both breathing hard. We should get married, he said. I know that's even faster than asking you to come with me, but I want to do this right. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours. Is that a proposal, Xavier Yates? Delilah asked, unable to keep from smiling. It is. He dropped to one knee right there in his boarding house room, still holding her hands. Delilah Carter, will you marry me? Will you come to the mountains and build a life with me? Will you let me spend every day trying to make you happy? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes to all of it. He stood and kissed her again, and Delilah felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They had so much to do, so many plans to make, but for this moment they just held each other and marveled at how quickly everything had changed. They spent the rest of the day making arrangements. Henderson was sorry to lose Delilah, but wished her well. He gave her the wages she was owed and threw in a bonus. Mrs. Patterson cried and hugged her, making her promise to write when she could. Rose and the other saloon girls threw together an impromptu farewell gathering that evening, toasting Delilah's happiness and future. The town's minister agreed to marry them that very evening, with Henderson and Mrs. Patterson standing as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, with Delilah wearing her best dress and Xavier in his cleanest shirt. But when he slipped a simple gold band on her finger, one he'd bought that afternoon from the jeweler, Delilah felt like a queen. I love you, Xavier said when the minister pronounced them married. I love you too, Delilah replied, and kissed her husband for the first time. They spent their wedding night in Xavier's boarding house room, cramped but blissfully happy. Xavier was gentle with her, patient and caring, making sure she felt comfortable and cherished. Delilah had never felt closer to another person, body and soul intertwined in a way that made her feel complete. They rose before dawn the next morning, loading their few possessions onto the horse Xavier had stabled at the edge of town. Delilah had sold or given away most of what she owned, keeping only what was practical and small enough to carry. Her savings were sewn into a belt she wore under her clothes, and she carried the colorful blanket her mother had made, the last piece of home she had left. Xavier had his horse, a sturdy brown mare named Sage, and they'd bought another horse for Delilah to ride, a gentle gray gelding the stable owner assured them was good on mountain trails. They loaded their supplies carefully, making sure everything was balanced and secure. Ready? Xavier asked, helping Delilah mount her horse. Ready, she confirmed, though her stomach was full of butterflies. She was leaving everything familiar behind, riding off into the mountains with a man she'd married after knowing him for 9 days. It was crazy. It was perfect. They rode out of Coolidge as the sun was just beginning to paint the sky with pink and gold. The town was quiet, most people still asleep. Delilah took one last look at the place she'd called home for 3 months, then turned her face forward toward the mountains and her new life. They'd been riding for about an hour when Xavier suddenly pulled Sage to a stop. Someone's following us, he said quietly, scanning the landscape behind them. Delilah's heart sank. She turned in her saddle and saw 3 riders in the distance, moving fast to catch up. Even from far away, she recognized Victor Lang's fancy vest glinting in the early morning sun. It's him, she said. He must have found out we were leaving. Xavier's jaw tightened. Keep riding, he told her. Head toward those rocks up ahead, the big red ones. If this turns bad, I want you to have cover. Xavier, I'm not leaving you to face them alone. You're not leaving me, he said firmly. You're getting to safety. Please, Delilah, I need to know you're safe so I can focus on dealing with them. She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She nodded and urged her horse forward while Xavier positioned himself between her and the approaching riders, buying her time to reach the rocks. By the time she'd made it to shelter, Victor and his two friends had caught up to Xavier. She couldn't hear what they were saying from where she was, but she could see Victor gesturing angrily, see the way his friends had spread out to flank Xavier on either side. Xavier sat calm on Sage's back, his hands loose on the reins but ready for trouble. He said something that made Victor's face turn red with anger. One of the friends reached for what looked like a gun, and Delilah's heart stopped. But Xavier was faster. He moved like lightning, urging Sage forward and grabbing the man's gun arm before he could draw. There was a brief struggle, and then Xavier had the man on the ground, the gun kicked away into the dust. The second friend tried to rush Xavier while he was distracted, but Xavier spun and caught him with an elbow to the face that sent him reeling backward. Victor, seeing his friends defeated so quickly, pulled his own gun. Delilah screamed a warning, but Xavier had already seen. He dove from Sage's back, rolling to his feet as the shot went wild. Before Victor could fire again, Xavier was on him, wrestling for control of the weapon. They struggled for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Another shot rang out, and Delilah's scream echoed across the desert. Both men fell to the ground, and for a horrible moment, she couldn't tell who'd been hit. Then, Xavier was standing, breathing hard but unhurt. Victor lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder where his own gun had shot him in the struggle. His friends were groaning but getting to their feet, their fight clearly gone. "The next time you try something like this, I won't be so merciful," Xavier said, his voice carrying across the distance. "This is done. You leave us alone, and I'll let you live. Keep coming after us, and I promise you won't like how it ends." He picked up Victor's gun, emptied the bullets, and threw it far into the brush. Then he caught Sage's reins, mounted up, and rode to where Delilah waited with her heart in her throat. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, her hands running over his arms and chest, checking for wounds. "I'm fine," he assured her, catching her hands and holding them still. "He shot himself in his own shoulder during the struggle. He'll live, but he won't be coming after us again." "How can you be sure?" "Because he knows now that he can't win," Xavier said simply. "Men like Victor, they're only brave when they think they have the advantage. Take that away, and they're nothing but scared boys playing at being dangerous." Delilah looked back at the three men. Victor's friends were helping him onto his horse, all three of them looking defeated and furious, but making no move to follow. She let out a shaky breath. "Can we go now? I just want to get as far from them as possible." "We can go," Xavier agreed. "Let's go home, Mrs. Yates." Mrs. Yates. The name sent a thrill through Delilah despite everything that had just happened. She was married. She was safe. She was heading toward her new life with the man she loved. They rode hard for the rest of the morning, putting distance between themselves and Coolidge. Xavier kept checking behind them, but no one followed. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat the food Mrs. Martinez had packed for them as a wedding gift. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked as they sat in the shade of a juniper tree, sharing bread and cheese. "I think so," Delilah said. "That was terrifying, but you handled it perfectly. I've never seen anyone move that fast." "You learn to react quickly when you live alone in the mountains," Xavier said. "Mountain lions don't give you time to think, and neither do desperate men." "Is it always going to be like this?" Delilah asked quietly. "Are there more dangers where we're going?" Xavier was silent for a moment, then said honestly, "Yes. Life in the mountains is harder than life in town, and there are dangers. Wild animals, harsh weather, accidents when you're far from help. But I'll teach you everything I know, and I'll keep you as safe as I possibly can. I promise you that, Delilah." "I'm not afraid," she said, and realized it was true. "Not with you beside me." They continued their journey, leaving the desert behind and climbing into foothills covered with pine and juniper. The air grew cooler, crisper, and Delilah could smell the difference, the clean scent of evergreens replacing the dust and sage of the lowlands. That night they made camp in a small clearing beside a stream. Xavier showed Delilah how to properly set up a campsite, where to build a fire so it wouldn't spread, how to secure the horses so they wouldn't wander but could still graze. She watched him move with easy efficiency, clearly in his element here in the wilderness. "You're different out here," she observed as they sat by the fire after dinner. Different how? Xavier asked, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. More relaxed, like you fit here in a way you didn't quite fit in town. She tilted her head to look up at him. This is your real home, isn't it? It is, he admitted. Or it was. Or now my real home is wherever you are. They made love under the stars that night, with the sound of the stream singing nearby and the fire crackling softly. It was different than their wedding night, less tentative, more passionate. Delilah felt wild and free in a way she never had before, like the mountains were already changing her, helping her shed the careful, controlled person she'd become after her parents died. The next day they climbed higher, following trails that only someone who knew them well could spot. Xavier pointed out animal tracks, showed her which plants were safe to eat and which to avoid, taught her how to read the weather in the clouds. Delilah absorbed it all, fascinated by this new world opening up before her. By late afternoon, they reached a valley nestled between two peaks. A stream ran through it, and the slopes were covered with aspen and pine. In a clearing beside the stream sat a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney. This is it, Xavier said, pride evident in his voice. This is home. Delilah studied the cabin as they approached. It was small but well built, with a porch across the front and real glass windows that must have cost a fortune to haul up the mountain. Firewood was stacked neatly against one wall, and a small shed nearby probably held tools and supplies. It's beautiful, she said honestly. The setting was gorgeous, peaceful, and wild at the same time. You built this yourself? Most of it. I had help getting the logs in place and the roof on, hired some men from a nearby settlement for that, but the rest I did alone. He dismounted and came to help her down. What do you think? Can you be happy here? Delilah looked around at the golden aspens, the clear stream, the mountains rising on all sides. She breathed in the clean air and listened to the silence broken only by birdsong and water. Then she looked at Xavier, at the hope and love in his eyes. I can be happy anywhere you are, she said, but yes, I think I'm going to love it here. Xavier's face broke into a huge smile. He swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home, both of them laughing. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. One large room served as kitchen, dining, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A door in the back led to a smaller bedroom, and another door opened to what looked like a storage room. It's not much yet, Xavier said, setting her down, but we can make improvements over time. With your savings, we could add on, maybe build a proper kitchen addition or a second bedroom for when. He trailed off, looking suddenly bashful. For when we have children, Delilah finished for him, smiling. I'd like that. Not right away, maybe, but someday. They spent the afternoon unloading their supplies and settling in. Xavier showed Delilah where everything was stored, how the water pump worked, the root cellar where he kept food cool. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, they stood on the porch together, his arms wrapped around her from behind. Thank you, Delilah said softly. For what? For stepping between me and Victor that night, for seeing me as someone worth protecting, for giving me a reason to take chances again. She turned in his arms to face him. For loving me. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done, Xavier said, cupping her face in his hands. You're brave and strong and beautiful, and I fall more in love with you every day. He kissed her as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and Delilah felt utterly, completely content. This was home now, not because of the cabin or the beautiful setting, but because Xavier was here. He was her home, her safety, her future. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the valley in white. Delilah learned quickly how to survive in the mountains, how to read the weather, track animals, and preserve food. Xavier was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid for not knowing things that were second nature to him. She learned to shoot, both rifle and pistol, until Xavier was confident she could protect herself if needed. She learned to set snares for rabbits, to fish in the stream even when ice formed at the edges, to tell which trees would burn hot and which would just smoke. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done in Coolidge, but it was satisfying in a way pouring drinks had never been. They spent long winter evenings by the fire, Xavier teaching her to read tracks in the snow by drawing them out, Delilah teaching him songs her mother had taught her. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories, habits, dreams. Xavier carved her a set of beautiful wooden spoons as a Christmas gift. Delilah used her sewing skills to make him a warm winter coat lined with rabbit fur from the snares. When spring came and the snow melted, revealing the green world beneath, Delilah helped Xavier plant a garden. They worked side by side in the dark soil, and she felt a sense of ownership and pride she'd never experienced before. This was theirs, their land, their food, their life together. "I was thinking," Xavier said one afternoon as they took a break from planting, "maybe we should expand the cabin before next winter, add on that second bedroom we talked about." Delilah smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "That might be good timing," she said softly. Xavier's eyes widened as he understood. Are we, I think so. It's early yet, but I'm pretty sure." She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was certain. Now, seeing the joy bloom across Xavier's face, she was glad she'd told him. He whooped with happiness, picking her up and spinning her around before remembering to be gentle. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Delilah, we're having a baby." "We are," she confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "You're going to be a father. And you're going to be a mother." He kissed her, tender and sweet. "The best mother? I already know it." They started work on the addition immediately, Xavier insisting that Delilah only help with the lighter tasks now that she was pregnant. He hired 2 men from the settlement 10 miles away to help with the heavy work, and by midsummer they'd added a good-sized bedroom and a small nursery. Delilah spent her time making the space ready, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, preparing for the new life they'd created together. Xavier built a beautiful wooden cradle, carved with images of aspen leaves and mountain peaks. It was the finest piece of furniture Delilah had ever seen. In early December, on a snowy afternoon when the world was quiet and white, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Xavier assisted with the birth, having learned from his mother how to help when no doctor was available. He was steady and calm, even though Delilah could see the fear in his eyes, fear for her, fear that something might go wrong. But everything went right. Their son came into the world squalling and perfect, with dark hair like his father and a fierce spirit that made them both laugh through their tears. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked, cradling the baby against her chest while Xavier sat beside her on the bed, his arm around both of them. "What about James?" Xavier suggested. "That was my father's name. He would have loved to meet his grandson." "James Yates," Delilah tested the name. "I like it. James it is." They spent the winter learning to be parents, Xavier proving to be as patient and loving with their son as he was with Delilah. He would walk James around the cabin when the baby fussed at night, singing rough lullabies in his deep voice until the crying stopped. He changed diapers without complaint and spent hours just watching the baby sleep, awe written across his face. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted one night as they lay in bed with James sleeping in his cradle nearby. "After my parents died, I figured I'd spend the rest of my life alone. And then you walked into that saloon, and everything changed." "You changed everything for me, too," Delilah said, turning to kiss him. "I was just surviving, just getting through each day. You taught me how to live again." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved exploring the mountains with his father. When he was 3, Delilah gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Rose, named for her mother and for her friend back in Coolidge. Xavier proved equally adept at handling daughters, treating them with gentle care while teaching them to be strong and capable. They made trips down to settlements occasionally to trade and buy supplies, but the cabin in the valley remained their true home. Delilah sometimes thought about her old dreams of owning a house in town, of stability and security and civilization, but she wouldn't trade what she had now for anything. The mountains had given her something better than security. They'd given her freedom, purpose, and a love that grew stronger every day. Xavier taught their children everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness. James learned to track and hunt, becoming skilled enough that by age 10 he could provide meat for the family. Emma proved to have a gift for finding useful plants, learning which were medicinal and which were edible. Rose was the climber, scrambling up trees and rocks with fearless enthusiasm that gave Delilah heart attacks, but made Xavier laugh with pride. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier surprised Delilah by taking her back down to Coolidge for a visit. They left the children with a trusted neighbor family and made the 2-day journey together, reliving that first trip when everything had been new and uncertain. Coolidge had grown in the decade they'd been gone, new buildings replacing old ones, more people filling the streets. The Red Desert Saloon was still there, though Henderson had passed and new owners had taken over. The general store had expanded, and Mrs. Patterson, now quite elderly, was delighted to see them. "I always wondered what became of you two," she said, hugging Delilah tight. "I'm so glad you're happy." They had dinner at the Martinez restaurant, which was now run by the Martinez's daughter, but still served the same delicious food. As they walked through town afterward, Delilah realized she felt like a visitor here, not a resident. This place held memories, but not her heart anymore. Her heart was in a cabin in the mountains with 3 children and a man who'd loved her faithfully for 10 years. "Ready to go home?" Xavier asked, reading her expression. "More than ready," she confirmed. They spent the night at the boarding house where they had spent their wedding night, making love quietly and talking about how different they were from the people they'd been a decade ago. Xavier had silver threading through his dark hair now, and Delilah had laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling. But the love between them had only deepened, becoming something solid and unshakable. The journey back to the cabin felt like returning to where they belonged. When they crested the final ridge and saw their valley spread below them, their children running out of the neighbor's cabin to greet them, Delilah felt her heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you," she said to Xavier as they watched their children race toward them. "For what?" "For stepping between me and a drunk gambler 10 years ago, for seeing something in me worth protecting, for building this life with me." She gestured at their children, at the valley, at everything they'd created together. "For loving me enough to let me choose." Xavier pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Loving you was never a choice, Delilah. It was inevitable. From the moment I saw you in that saloon, you were mine and I was yours. I just had to wait for you to realize it too." "That's not yours," she quoted with a smile, remembering those first words he'd spoken on her behalf. "But I am yours, Xavier Yates, today and always." "And I'm yours," he replied, "today and always." Their children reached them then, and they were swept up in hugs and excited chatter about everything that had happened while they were gone. James had caught a huge fish. Emma had found a new meadow full of healing herbs. Rose had climbed to the top of the tallest pine tree in the valley. That night, with their children finally asleep in the nursery they'd long outgrown but refused to leave, Xavier and Delilah sat on their porch watching the stars. The night was cool and clear, and the sounds of the forest surrounded them, familiar as breathing. "Do you ever regret it?" Xavier asked quietly. "Giving up your plans for life in town, coming here with me after knowing me for only 9 days?" Delilah thought about the question seriously, as it deserved. She thought about the girl she'd been, wounded and cautious, focused only on survival and security. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong and capable, mother to 3 beautiful children, wife to a man who loved her with his whole heart. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "This life, this family, you, it's more than I ever dreamed of having. You didn't just protect me that night in the saloon, Xavier. You saved me. You reminded me that life is worth living, that love is worth the risk." "You saved me too," Xavier said, pulling her against his side. "I was just existing up here, not really living. You brought light and laughter back into my world. You gave me a reason to be more than just a man surviving alone in the mountains." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other and the peace of their valley. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and strong. Above, the stars blazed in the vast darkness, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when a mountain man stepped between a frightened woman and danger, and in doing so, stepped into his future. "I love you," Delilah said into the darkness. "I love you too," Xavier replied, "today and always and forever." And there, in a valley in the Arizona mountains, with their children sleeping and their love strong as the peaks around them, Xavier and Delilah Yates lived the rest of their days in the kind of happiness that only comes from taking chances on love, from protecting what matters, and from choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. Years continued to flow like the stream beside their cabin. James grew into a young man as strong and capable as his father, eventually meeting a girl from the nearby settlement and building his own cabin just over the ridge. Emma's gift with plants led her to become something of a healer for the scattered mountain families, and people would travel days to seek her remedies. Rose married a trader who appreciated her adventurous spirit, and together they split their time between the mountains and the lower towns, bringing news and supplies to isolated families. Xavier and Delilah grew old together in their valley, their love weathering every storm and growing richer with each passing year. On cold winter nights, they would tell their grandchildren about how they met, about the drunk gambler, and the 3 words that changed everything. "That's not yours," they would say, and the grandchildren would giggle and beg to hear the story again, never tiring of the tale of how their grandparents fell in love. When Xavier was 72 and Delilah 70, he built her a surprise, a beautiful gazebo overlooking the valley where they had spent their lives together. They would sit there on summer evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set behind the mountains they loved. "I'd do it all again," Xavier said one evening, his hand clasped in hers, both of them old now, but their love as young as ever. "Every moment, every choice, everything that led me to you." "Me too," Delilah agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every single moment." They lived long, full lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried forward the values they'd instilled: courage, kindness, respect, and the belief that love was always worth fighting for. When Xavier finally passed at age 85, peacefully in his sleep with Delilah beside him, the whole mountain community mourned. Delilah followed him 3 years later, her body simply deciding it was time to be with her love again. They were buried together on a hill overlooking their valley, under an aspen tree that turned gold every autumn. Their children carved their names into a stone marker, along with the dates of their birth and death, and one other thing. Beneath their names, it simply said, "He stepped between, and she chose love, today and always." And in the valley below, their family continued to thrive. Generation after generation, each one told the story of how it all began. Of a gambler who tried to take what wasn't his, of a mountain man who stood up for what was right, and of a woman brave enough to follow her heart into the wilderness and find home in the arms of a man who loved her truly and well. The cabin still stood decades later, maintained by the family as a reminder of where they came from. The garden Delilah planted that first spring had grown wild and then been tamed again by her descendants. The cradle Xavier carved rocked new babies in every generation, and on quiet nights, when the wind moved through the aspens and the stream sang its eternal song, some swore they could hear laughter, the sound of 2 souls still together, still in love, still grateful for 3 simple words spoken in a saloon so long ago: "That's not yours." But she'd been his, and he had been hers. And their love had been the kind that novels are written about, songs sung for, and memories treasured through endless generations. They'd built something beautiful from a single moment of courage, proved that love at first sight could last a lifetime, and showed that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances when your heart says it's right. Their story became legend in the mountains, told and retold until no one was quite sure anymore where truth ended and myth began. But the heart of it remained true. A mountain man and a saloon girl who found each other in the Wild West, who built a love that lasted beyond death, who proved that protection and respect could blossom into the deepest kind of devotion. And every autumn, when the aspens turned gold and the mountains blazed with color, just as Xavier had described them so long ago, their descendants would gather at the old cabin and remember. Remember that love is worth fighting for, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes, just sometimes, a single moment can change everything. "That's not yours," Xavier had said. But in the end, everything had been theirs. All the joy and struggle and beauty of a life built together in the wilderness, all the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, all the love that had started with 3 simple words and grown into something infinite and eternal. In the end, that's all that really matters. Not how long you know someone before you love them, not whether your path is easy or hard, not whether you live in a town or a mountain valley. What matters is that you love truly, protect fiercely, and choose each other every day until the very end. And that's exactly what Xavier and Delilah did, living proof that the best love stories are the ones written not in grand gestures, but in daily choices, in steadfast devotion, in simply being there for each other through every season of life. They'd started with a moment in a saloon and built a legacy that would last forever, carved not just into stone markers, but into the hearts of everyone who heard their story and believed, even for a moment, in the power of true love. The mountains kept their secrets, the valley protected their memory, and the aspen tree above their resting place turned gold every year without fail, a reminder that some loves are as eternal as the mountains themselves, as constant as the changing seasons, as true as the sun rising each morning over the peaks they'd called home. "That's not yours," Xavier had said. And in saying it, he'd claimed something far more precious than either of them could have imagined, a love that would echo through time, a story that would inspire generations, and a life together that proved beyond any doubt that the best things are always worth fighting for.